Hi, in this video we're going to see how to create a form for our mobile app. So this will going to be the end result, in which we have a form with several uh, text fields. You see that there is a placeholder here. If I click, it gives me some instruction as a user in what to insert as information. Um, there is here this radio mobile friendly buttons, this slider, and as well as this button right here in a text box. So let's see how to do that. I'm starting with this template page, in which I have a page, a header, a content, and a footer. I have included the links, the jQuery mobile libraries. I'm just going to give it a title of form, and I'm going to save it. Save it as form HTML. I'm just going to give them the header and the footer some information right here, and as always I'm gonna insert my form within the content div. Now the first tag to type in is the form tag. Don't forget to always close the tags that you open. Now within the form tag, the most important attributes are three. So first, it's good practice to give every tag, especially in a form, an ID. So I'm just going to give it the ID F. The next important attribute for the form tag is the method, and that is usually either get or post. Just going to use get for now, and well, we're going to see why get is important in a follow-up video, in which we're going to actually get the data from the user through this form. And the final important attribute in the form tag is the action, and within the action you insert as a value the page that you wish to actually process the form. So obviously I'm just giving a placeholder name right here. It's probably not the name of my PHP or my HTML file that's going to process the form. Just to put something. And now within now this tags, I'm just going to make a comment. All of the form fields then will be added here. So in this way you can make a comment in HTML. So within this region, all of the form fields will be added here. So the first thing to create for each field, although not necessary, it's good practice, especially in jQuery, is to add a div which is going to contain both the label and the form field. Now we're going to give that the data role field contain, and as we said, this div tag is going to contain both the label and the form field. Now remember, my first form field was first name, so it is almost in all cases, except some few exceptions, form fields will use the input tag. So actually for the form fields we use the input tag, and the first attribute to define in the input tag is the type. Now since this is a first name that I wish to get from my user, his or her first name, obviously the type of that input is going to be not telephone but text. As it is good practice to give all of your form fields at least an ID, and usually we also need the name attribute, but initially I'm gonna give it an ID which is meaningful, so first name. And as you saw, we could also use another attribute which is some kind of placeholder which is gonna give some information to the user of what is expected from him or her to insert, so first name only. Now if I would save it and let's review, so you see there is our first form field. Now obviously a label would improve the usability and the experience of this form field, so for that there is a special tag, that's the label tag, and we need to give it obviously a meaningful label, so first name. And it's important, the most important attribute for the label is the for attribute. So in the for you specify the ID of the input or the form field that you link this label to. So in other words, here in the for attribute I'm specifying for which label is this text. So in this way I'm making the link of this label to the input tag with ID first name. So let's see in the preview then what we did. You see that if somebody actually, the label also has a usability aspect. If somebody taps actually in the label, the cursor will automatically be focused on the input type text with first name, with ID first name. Now since the second field that I would like to have is the last name, I'm just gonna copy that code and paste it just below the first name. And since there are just a few changes to make, so instead of first name in this case I have last name, so I'm gonna change the ID and the for. Well, I would like to have a placeholder for that. I'm just gonna change the label, so I just created the last name. Let's preview that as well to see whether everything is fine. So you see we have first name and last name. It's good. Now since this is a kind of a typical form, the next usually item is a login. So I'm gonna again copy and paste because most of the information is gonna be the same. Now the login, usually nowadays, I'm just gonna delete the information that I'm gonna replace. So this label is gonna be named login. The ID of that input type text is gonna be login, so the label also needs to have the link to this ID. Now since it's quite usual nowadays to use your email in services for a login, as you can see in the inputs, in the type attributes of the input tag, there are several options like color, date, time, and also the value of email. So this is actually an HTML5 feature in which the form can control whether somebody has, whether a user has inserted a valid email address. So I think it would be useful here to also place a placeholder. So here we can basically this serves as a feedback message for the user. So use your email would be something which is meaningful. and that's then my login. Now for the following field, usually what follows a login is a password. Well, again, I'm just gonna copy and paste the previous form field, and I'm just gonna change the necessary stuff. So I'm gonna give it a label of password. Obviously the ID should be unique, so I'm just gonna give it a short ID. So I changed the ID and the 4 in the label. Now in this case, I'm just gonna remove the placeholder as well for the moment. And in this case, you see that there is actually a special input type when it comes to the password, which is type equals to password. Now here the placeholder is indeed also useful, so for example use at least 6 characters, right? And another attribute which is particularly useful for this case is the one which is known as max length. In other words, we are restricting the characters that one can insert in these fields to 20. So let's have a look how the form evolved. So we have the first name, the last name. If I tap on this label, you see that this field becomes active, and you see in the password I cannot actually type more than 20 characters. That's exactly what I wanted, so let's move on, and we're gonna look now at a different form field. Now, so I'm gonna copy now the field container, and I'm gonna close the div. It's always important to close immediately the tags that you create. And for this, in this case, I would like to have some information about the gender of the user. Now, in order to create that, now we first need to use another tag, which is known as the field set. As you see, I mentioned several times, the first thing that I'm doing after typing a tag is to immediately close it. Now, the field set, we need to give it a data role equals to control group, and then we're gonna have 2 values. Remember, that's we would like to get some information about the gender of the user. So for this case, we again need to use the inputs tag. Now for this case, since the gender can only have 1 value, the type needs to be radio. As we said, it's quite important to give an ID to all of our input tags, to all of our form fields generally. So I'm gonna give that the ID gender male. And another important attribute for the inputs type radio is to give it a value. So say that we're gonna give it a 0. Well, as previously, we're gonna also create a label. As you can see, I'm immediately closing the label tag that I created, and it's gonna be for the ID for the inputs with ID gender male. Well, the label is gonna be male, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna copy the inputs in order to create the second, which is obviously going to be female. just gonna change just the information that is needed, and now I need to specify a different value. So when somebody actually chooses the value female, chooses the option female I should say, then what's communicated from the form is the value 1. And when somebody chooses the option male, what's communicated from the form is the value 0. Now I would save the file and look at the preview to see what is it that we actually did right here. So you see here we have the radio. Now one thing that is missing is to give it a, we could also actually add something which is not necessary but it's nice to have, which is known as a legend, which is actually gonna group the two fields. Now, as I said, in most cases it's fine to skip the name. It's actually good to have actually also a name attribute, so I'm also gonna add that name attribute right here. And actually it's no, it's actually necessary, I should say, to include the name attribute for type of radio, because that's what's linking basically these two values. So the input type radio needs to have the attribute name, and the name in all of the options of this radio must be the same. So in this case, since I want my gender to be either male or female, I need to give my input type radio the same name. So if I would preview it right now, then first of all you see here the legend that I included with the gender, and you see that now it's working properly. So previously actually I couldn't click it because I didn't have inserted the attribute name, and as I said, it needs to have the exact same value. Now another attribute, which is another form field I should say, which is more mobile friendly, is the input type range. So again, I'm gonna copy and paste and create a new field contain. So the first thing I'm gonna do is close that div, and now again I'm gonna use the input tag. Now as I said, the type is a range. So actually this type what creates is a slider which is quite, as I said, handy on mobile phones. So again, as mentioned, I'm gonna give it an ID. So say I want to find out how many phone calls my user does per week, so I'm gonna give it the ID phone calls. And the input type range needs to have two attributes, min, so the minimum value that the range will have, and max. So I constrain then my range when it comes to phone calls per week from 0 to 100. And finally I'm gonna insert also a label to improve the usability. As we said, it's necessary to have a for attribute which needs to have the same value with the ID of the input, and then we need to give it a meaningful label. So how many phone calls do you make per week? Now let's preview in order to see how does this look like. So here's our range. So actually you see as a UI component it's like a slider. It also added automatically this feedback, this text here, which you actually can also change as a user, and then the slider here will change automatically. So you can see this a really neat feature for some form fields. Now the next let's add some more form fields. So for the next one is to add a select form field. So again, I'm gonna copy and paste the field content. I'm closing the div. That's the first thing that I'm doing. And now I would like to have a select option, which refers to whether somebody would like to receive the newsletter. That's again a typical form field that you see in the web. Now for that reason, we're going to use a different tag now, which is known as the select. The first thing to do is to give it an ID. So since this is about receiving the newsletter, this is going to be the ID that I'm going to insert. And next I need to give it a data role attribute so that jQuery is going to process it as a mobile friendly field. And then the value for this attribute is going to be slider. Now I'm going to add the label before I add the options. So as we said, the label needs to have, it's necessary to have a for attribute, and the for attribute needs to have the same value as the ID that it is for. Finally, I need to type in the message, which needs to be obviously something meaningful. Would you like to receive our newsletter? Is the message for the label. Now obviously users should choose from two options. So that's the difference also with the select. So since a select has specific options, we need to actually specify them with the option tag. So the option tag, the most important attribute in the option tag is the value. In other words, if somebody actually chooses that value, what should the form return? So here you could have again a number or anything that you choose, and in here within the option tag you need to give it a meaningful label basically. So option number 1 would be yes, and it would return the value 1, whereas the second option will be obviously no, and the value would be 0. The value is something that you choose, so it could have been also n and y, so y for yes and n for no, or it could have been even no and yes, well, yes for yes and no for no. However, I choose to give them those numbers, so this is something that you can specify. Now let's preview this field of our form. So you see that you have this kind of toggle button that jQuery creates for us when we use the select tag. Now I'm almost at the end of the form fields. Well, this is a rather large form, as you see, for a mobile phone, so usually in your cases it's gonna be much smaller. Nevertheless, I would like to show you most of the important form fields that you could use for your apps. Now the following form field is the one which I can specify with the tag text area. and this is I think self-explanatory. So this is an area where a user can type more text basically. Now it's important to give it an ID, and usually, you know, this is, as I said, something that the user will type some more text, so it could be some then we wish that the user gives some comments. Again, I'm gonna give it a label. The label in this case is straightforward, and I need to use the for attributes and give it a value, the same value with the ID of my form field. Now finally, before I preview, we need to submit the form. So for that reason, we need to have a submit button. So that's why I'm gonna make the last field contain right here, and for the submit button we need to use again the input tag, and as you can see in the type, well, we also have a button, but if we scroll down this short list of values, you can see that we also have a type submit. Now it's also handy to use the value attribute, which is actually gonna label the field, so it's gonna give it something, you could give it something more meaningful. So I'm gonna give it a value of save the data, and that will be actually the label for my submit button. So I'm gonna finally now preview the form, so you see here at the end that one can actually insert some, type in some comments, and by clicking this button it's gonna submit the data. So that's our nicely looking mobile friendly form.